In pretty much every sport, the new generation seems to get that little bit better, more powerful, more athletic, better science, and bigger performances. And there's one or two players that make us rethink what's possible. This season in the NBA, that player is Cooper Flagg. At just 18 years old, he's already set records that used to belong to LeBron James, including the most points ever scored by a teenager in a single game. But just how good is this kid? And how should we measure his performance? Is it with the data or with what feels right? Let's find out.
And now it's time.
It's time.
It's time for
Moneyball.
Moneyball.
Are you familiar with the story of Moneyball?
Okay, so long before this show was even a thing, this guy got his nickname from friends and from his family, and the nickname makes him the perfect guest for this show. He's still not old enough to drink or to vote, which is another nod to the nickname. Let me introduce a stats and sports data genius, the Moneyball Kid, 17-year-old Zephyr Cook. Zephyr, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
How did you get the nickname Moneyball Kid?
Well, I mean, ever since I was like roughly, I would say 7 or 8, maybe even a little bit younger, I've been very interested in sports. And I think once I realized I've always been very obsessed with stats in particular. Even when I was 3, I could name like all the US presidents in order. And like, so I've always been interested in like stats and data. Once I started watching sports and I realized there was so much data behind it, it was kind of like, well, okay, this is my thing now. And then my mom probably gave me that nickname when I was like 9 or 10. And then I finally, like even before I had watched the movie, and then I finally watched the movie when I was like 12 or 13 and I loved it.
So how deep do you go with the stats and the data? Do you like sort of really dig in? Is it how you spend your Friday nights at home? Like how into it are you?
It is how I spend a lot of Friday nights at home. Yeah, I love the stats. I like the financing side of it as well, like the cap space. I've tended to do this thing where I have my own like mock versions of how I would like change my teams in each off season, and it's always been something I'm interested in. And then the
So
stats,
you do off-season fantasy football then?
to some extent off-season-ish fantasy football, yeah. So yeah, I love stats.
Were you into maths at school?
I'm actually not as good as maths at school that you might expect. I'm good
Yeah.
at like probability and like actual stats stuff. Once you get to geometry, I'm dead. But I'm okay at maths at school. I'm good.
Let's move to Cooper Flagg. And when we talk about how good he actually is, I want to know from you as like a stats guy, how should we be measuring his performances, and what do you think the data that you're seeing tells us about his potential in the NBA?
So the first thing with Flag is, and it's the simplest statistic, but it's the scoring volume for his age. A lot of rookies, even some of the guys who are the best players in the league right now, Giannis, Shea, Steph Curry, a lot of these guys, they started their NBA careers averaging 10, 11, 12 points per game on just okay efficiency. So what we're seeing with Flag is to average 20 points a game when you're 18 years old is ridiculous. To do it at the efficiency he's done it at as well is ridiculous. He's shooting almost 50% from the field.
That's crazy.
A lot of rookies, even when they do score well, they're lower efficiency because they're still getting adjusted to the league. And that's what really stands out to me. He has finishing moves that you'd expect a 28-year-old to have mastered at that point in their careers, He's doing finishing moves that even guys like Jason Tatum haven't fully mastered yet at 18 years old. He's got such a insane repertoire of ways to score on a defense, ways to get past a defender, ways to just blow by defenders, get to the rim, hit the mid-range. He's one of the most complete teenagers we've ever seen.
And the NBA is on at a terrible time here in Australia. Most of the games are on sort of mid-morning when I'm supposed to be working, so I don't get to watch a lot. But I did pick up it was a Saturday morning here, I think a Friday night game where he was playing a couple of months ago, and I could see straight away how good he was. I didn't realize at the time how young he is. He's almost your age. I mean, he's only a year or so older than you.
Yeah.
Where do you see his potential going?
I mean, his potential is being one of the best players in the NBA. I think it's way too early to really start talking all time, but I think among the NBA right now, you're going to see him, first of all, be the franchise cornerstone for the Mavericks. That's the big thing. They traded away Luka Doncic in what most people consider to be one of the stupidest trades in NBA history, but they have Flag now, so they're almost okay because they have their new franchise guy. The expectation for him will be to be the number one guy on a championship team.
It's wild. Honestly, like he's 18. Like blows my mind.
I know,
And
it's wild.
can we talk about that 49-point game? I mean, the comparisons are there to LeBron already because he's broken so many of LeBron's records from when he was a teenager. And when you look at his numbers, Zephyr, what is it about him and his performances and where this is going? Why do you think this probably isn't a one-off?
Well, first of all, it's just because with a lot of rookies, what we see little flashes of what they could be in the future. They might drop a 30-point game here and there,
Yeah.
but they still need time because the level from college to the NBA or even one of the European leagues or the Australian league to the NBA is different. You're dealing with guys who are bigger, stronger, faster, more physical. You have to adjust to the league. A lot of rookies, Flagg's age, have shooting issues. They have foul troubles. And so what you normally expect is they show their baseline potential and then they go beyond that. With Flagg, it's already like right here. And it shows a level of maturity in his game that basically no other teenager in NBA history has really had other than
Is this a
LeBron.
surprise? Like, have you seen much from his college data, like what he did in college, and was this unexpected?
So he was a very hyped up prospect coming out of college, coming out of high school. He's been a hyped up prospect since he was 16 years old. So there has been an expectation. I don't think anyone expects him to be this good this quickly.
It's one thing to have that hype, but to be able to do it is a whole other thing, right?
No one expected him to already be dropping 20 points a game, I don't think. No one expected him to already have the finishing repertoire that he already has. Everyone expected him to be a good defender, but the fact that he's already a two-way superstar in the league is unprecedented.
You've got all the lingo down, two-way superstar. I love that. 49 points and 10 rebounds, youngest and most by a teenager. He's the youngest 40-plus scorer ever and the youngest player to record 25-plus points, 10 assists, and 3 consecutive 30-point games. It's not just that one-off 49-point game. He's delivered now all through this season. What are the hopes like for Minnesota now? I know he's picked up a little injury just this week, but I mean, could he carry them into a finals run?
So for the Mavericks, it will be I don't think the next couple of years they'll be that competitive. The West is just so stacked with teams. I think right now they're 11th or 12th. And so I think it'll take time. They need to build a good team around him, right? We've seen far too many times a really generational player fall on a team that's just not very good around them. But I think in 3 to 4 years, if they can really build a contender around Flagg, I think you can definitely expect to see the beginning of, at the very least, a really strong contender in the Western Conference. And that's what they would hope for if he can stay healthy, if they can get good players around him. They have Kyrie Irving right now, but he's getting older. They're going to need to get young, really good role players around him. And I think if they can do that, they'll be a contender within a few years.
Yeah, the Aussie connection there too. Kyrie was born in Melbourne, I think.
Yes, he was.
Now, let's dig into the data a little bit more because early in the season, I noted that Flagg was used more as a point guard and he's shifted position now that the coach has put him in at forward and his numbers have jumped completely. I don't know if you want to take us through some of those numbers, but the change is pretty dramatic. What does that tell you about, I guess, how the coaching staff maybe were looking at that potential and that data? Because he's gone from a 38% shooter to a 51% shooter between those two positions.
Yeah, and he's gone from 13 points to over 20 points a game with it. I think the main thing is Flagg is naturally supposed to be a two-way wing in the sense that he is a really tall, strong, long wingspan player who you want to get opportunities to not only dominate on the defensive end, but be able to just go to the rim, attack the paint, be aggressive on offense, almost in a similar light to someone like Kawhi Leonard or Giannis Antetokounmpo, someone who's going to be dominant on the defensive end, and then they're not the point guard. They don't have to distribute the ball to anyone else, even though they can. Their main job is to get to the rim and be the leading scorer on the team. So I think when they were starting him at point guard, he was still having to be the guy who distributes for everyone else rather than just being the forward who is able to be the leading scorer on a team and really has as much freedom as he wants to attack the rim rather than having to play this half-court style offense. And I think the coaches realized that really quickly. Just because the numbers and the efficiency wasn't really there at the start of the year.
Yeah, well, it seems like he's being
realized.
used much more efficiently now, and his in-game efficiency is obviously much higher with that big goal scoring percentage uplift is huge. It's incredible, especially for, like you said, like a player in their first season, right? But how much of the coaching in the NBA, from what you know and from what you see of some of these teams, is based on feel and what they see. And how much do you think is data driven? Or should it be? How much should be data driven?
Coaching is so much more data driven than it used to be. I mean, even with the development of AI, a lot of sports teams are using AI to make probability models on things. And so what we're seeing is a coaching style far more based on, especially even on the level of personal trainers and athletic performance, avoiding injury. We're seeing so much more database stuff. And I think there needs to be a balance of the two. I think for players that are super young, you need to be able to develop kind of their character as well. We've seen far too many players in the NBA who have all the talent but kind of waste it either because they have a bad mentality on the court or a bad mentality off the court. So there needs to still be some of that mentorship that we'd see with coaches like Phil Jackson back in the 80s and 90s. But the data-driven stuff helps efficiency. It helps players avoid injury. It helps players get
I think
stronger.
that's a big one too, isn't it? Like fatigue is a big thing, and avoiding injury, right? You see it a lot in our national sports here, in the AFL, in rugby league, in union, and as well in soccer and football, right? Where they're tracking exactly how many sprints players are doing in games or even in training, how far they're running, how many max efforts they're doing. And I know in rugby league, for example, in the NRL, they look at what players are getting near like a red zone or a red line, and who needs a rest, who needs to come off, who needs fewer minutes in the next game, who needs more recovery time after a game. It's that data side and that science side is becoming, especially on that injury management and minimization side of things, is a bigger deal. Speaking of injuries, I mean, we mentioned it. He's picked up a little niggle. Hopefully, not out for too long. But when you look at the numbers, Zephyr, is there anyone else in the NBA, when you look at the numbers so far for this season, that will get near him for Rookie of the Year?
So there's one, and actually at the beginning of the year, I would have picked him as favorite for the Rookie of the Year until Flagg just exploded, and it's Connor Knuppel, the small forward who is playing for the Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah.
He's very good, totally different style of player. He's one of the best 3-point shooting rookies we've ever seen. I think he's all right. He's very close to breaking the record for most 3-point shots made by a rookie ever. They were teammates together at Duke, him and Cooper Flagg. So he's elite. He also scored, I believe, 35 in that game where Cooper Flagg scored 49 against the Hornets, which Charlotte won that game. That was just a great battle of two really elite young players. I think Knuppel, the difference is right now, he's still not quite as productive. And in the future, I see him more as like the number 2 on a championship team, like the really elite shooter, almost like the Klay Thompson-esque figure on a championship team, versus Flagg, who I do think will be the number 1 on a championship team one.
Well, just then looking ahead a little bit, there's all this talk about how good he is, comparisons to LeBron. I guess my question to you is he the best teenager in the history of the NBA, at least in the last 20 years or so? And if he isn't, what's the argument against that case? Because from me on the sideline here, I'm looking at those performances and those statistics, and he's blowing it out of the water.
As of right now, it comes down to him and LeBron. And as far as their stats go in the rookie year, LeBron averaged slightly more points. Flagg is averaging more rebounds. LeBron averaged some more assists, and Flagg is actually shooting a lot more efficiently than LeBron did, and is a better defender than LeBron. So it's an interesting comparison to make. The reason I might still say LeBron is the greatest teenager in NBA history is just a lot of the data and really elite training programs that we have today didn't exist in 2003.
That's true.
LeBron was just truly a generational guy who came in the league at a time when obviously it was right as Michael Jordan his career was ending. You had Kobe and Shaq, and then he just really took the reins as the face of the league almost immediately.
You see college athletes now coming in almost fully formed men, right? Whereas back in the day, I think they were still able to kind of play their way into the team and into the franchise over probably a couple of seasons. And you see it in other sports too. And I think the money that goes into college basketball now, the training techniques and the sports science and the support that they get means that they're progressing much quicker. And so LeBron coming in the way that he did, it was generational and it was out of the box more than what Cooper Flagg is these days.
Because LeBron also didn't even go to college. LeBron skipped college. He went right out of senior year of high school. It's like if I went to the NBA in 6 months' time. It's just it's an unprecedented thing. He literally he was drafted in the NBA at my age that I am right now at 17, and so that's just truly historic. I think where Flagg
the crazy thing is he's only a couple of years younger than me now. I mean, that's
Yeah, the
wild. His
longevity is
longevity is just is
yeah.
off the charts. We could
You
do a
can
whole
talk
other episode
LeBron
on that.
you could talk LeBron longevity statistics all day. There's so many that you can bring up. But as far as the comparisons to Flagg, I think LeBron showed a lot more raw talent in his rookie year. Flagg is already showing how complete of a player he is. The only thing that Flagg still could probably improve is his three-point shot. But like the
Gee, you're a harsh
defending,
critic.
well, it's just the one thing. It's
Statistically speaking.
30% is slightly below league average, but I mean, the
Yeah.
finishing, the playmaking, the defending, it's all already there for Flagg. And then the other interesting thing is LeBron was the face of the league almost immediately. There's just so many more star players in the league now. There's so much more of a quantity of star players that it makes Flagg hard to immediately distinguish himself because obviously there's also Wemby as far as like really exciting young players go.
Yeah.
There's Anthony Edwards. There's Luka. I would still say LeBron's more historic, but Flagg might be a tad better.
Nice. Well, mate, I like the way that you've summed that up. I think either way, it's an exciting kind of time ahead with these young players doing so well. And Cooper Flagg I think he's just going to keep killing it in the NBA, which is super exciting. For Aussie fans, already had a teenage success story in Josh Giddey, but he succeeded, I guess, in a bit of a different way, and he's come into his own in a different way. Compared to someone like Cooper Flagg, he's 23 now. He's doing really well at Chicago. A big part of his games is about tempo and assists and really bringing that pace and the passing game. If you're building a roster now, Zephyr, how differently do teams value somebody like a Josh Giddey compared to the type of player like Cooper Flagg, even though obviously both teenage standouts, but they both bring something quite different?
I don't think you would build the team around Giddey. I think you would build Giddey as the teammate to someone like Flagg almost, because Giddey brings size, he brings elite passing, he brings solid defense as well. He's almost averaged a triple double this year.
Yes.
And that's been really impressive because he's a 6'7" point guard, which brings something unique. But I think because Flagg is already showing how much of a scoring god he could be in the future, teams would be more inclined to build around Flagg as like the leading guy on a team, but Giddey as someone who's part of an elite roster all around and more like the second or third best player, somebody who can really feed somebody like a Giddey. Somebody like a Flagg doesn't have to worry about being the distributor. Giddey's the distributor.
100%. And I think that's what the Chicago Bulls have sort of realized, and they're reaping the benefit of him finding his way there and finding that role or being given that role in that team, because I think end of last season, it wasn't going so great at Oklahoma, and I think it's just great to see him sort of really blossoming. Like you said, he's almost averaging a triple-double, and he just looks more confident. He's coming into his own, and I think having that 4-year contract, knowing what he's doing, knowing that he's at Chicago, for us Australian basketball fans, it's great to see him doing so well. The trade window has closed recently, and from what I understand, it was one of the most active in a long time. A lot of trades. When you see these sort of in-season trades, and you see it a bit in European football and in the English Premier League as well, there's not that many in-season trades that tend to really make a big difference to how a team performs at the business end of the season. Which of the moves that you've seen in this trade window do you think have genuinely changed the trajectory of a team and where they're going? And which ones do you think are really more aimed at kind of changing the conversation?
I think ones that are more conversation changers without being really game changers, it would be, for example, like Anthony Davis to the Wizards. First of all, he's not even going to play for the rest of the year. He's injured. That felt like more of a trade that's for like next year in the future. It was like a big trade when it was made. The one trade that I could see really changing this year's, changing at least the playoff trajectory for certain teams is the James Harden to the Cavaliers trade. So I'm a Los Angeles Clippers fan. James Harden was on the Los Angeles Clippers. We traded him. I have my own reasons for why I'm not too upset with that, mostly because we're getting younger. But for the Cavaliers, having an elite point guard like James Harden really does change that squad. They're one of the most star-studded squads in the league now. Though what'll be interesting to see them in the playoffs is James Harden has notoriously been kind of a playoff choker. He's kind of blown it in big playoff games.
He's been traded a bit, and every time that he makes a move, there's so much hype around him, and he's obviously a quality player, but never seems to really be able to go on with it, and then ends up being traded away.
So yeah, I think in this case he left the Clippers because they didn't want to give him a contract extension, and he wanted that final big money extension before he retires. I think him in a secondary role could work better than him being the number one guy. especially in an Eastern Conference that's kind of weaker this year. Jason Tatum is injured for the Celtics. Halliburton's been injured on the Pacers. They're out of it, even though they made the finals last year. And so it's a wide open conference.
Are you excited for the rest of the season now? Those sort of those pieces of the puzzle are in place.
I am. I think, the West is going to be a dogfight. The West always is a dogfight. There's just so many good teams. There's Oklahoma. There's the Spurs with Wembanyama. There's the Rockets with Kevin Durant. There's the Nuggets with Jokic. You go further down, there's the Lakers and Luka. It's an absolutely stacked conference. And then it'll be interesting to see who makes it out of the East, because there could be some dark horses that make it through that weakened Eastern Conference this year and maybe could upset whoever makes it through the West. I think it'll be a fun playoff.
Who's your tip for the final two teams? Who's going to be in the playoffs for the championship?
I'm going to say right now, the Spurs and the Celtics.
Okay.
I think that's
the
my tip.
Celtics.
I think even without, first of all, Jason Tatum could maybe come back towards the end of a playoff run. He's practicing with the G League team now. I think that's where he is at his recovery.
Yep.
But even without Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown's really stepped into his own this year. They have a really great team around him. They're really well coached. They're second, I believe, in the Eastern Conference right now. So I think they have playoff experience. They've been there before. So
Well,
I think
go on.
I think they'd be a team that could maybe even upset the Spurs, who are far less experienced in a finals matchup.
Well, I was just interrupting your great knowledge with a really crap stat from me, which is Jason Tatum's dad is actually an NBL championship winner here in
Really?
Australia. He won the
that is
championship last
interesting.
year as the coach with the Illawarra Hawks, my local team.
I had no idea. That's really interesting. I
Yes,
did not know the
I knew a
Aussie.
stat that the Moneyball Kid didn't know.
I did not know the Jason Tatum family lineage, Aussie basketball connection.
Yeah. So we've got that lineage back to the NBA and to a champion there and a champion here, which is cool. Speaking of champions and stars, the All-Star Weekend is on. They've made a few big changes to the NBA All-Star Weekend. I've always enjoyed the 3-point competitions and the dunk comps, and it's always been about that East v West rivalry. And tell me, they've made some changes, and now instead of East v West All-Stars, it's going to be the US versus internationals. Is that right?
So yeah, it's going to be basically there's 24 players in total. There's 2 US teams with 8 players and 1 world team with 8 players, and they'll go in like a 3-team tourney essentially to win. I think it's the NBA All-Star Game needed some changes. It's gotten so unpopular in recent years.
Yeah, like the TV ratings are down like
TV ratings
30%
are
on
way
down.
down. A lot of players don't want to play in it. They don't want to risk getting injured. A lot of players also just don't give a lot of effort when they're out there, because they don't want to risk an injury. So it's a very low effort game typically. And maybe they're hoping that the whole USA thing, it'll give players a kind of patriotic push to play better. The actual idea itself is interesting just because the world is really caught up to the U.S. at the level, and so you have stars like Wembanyama, Jokic, Luka, Giannis. You could argue the 4 best players in the NBA right now are not American. Luka, Shea, who's Canadian, Giannis, and Jokic.
I feel like you could almost have like 2 international teams almost, right, and be as competitive.
It's really so that is interesting to me to see kind of the ultimate test of how much has the world caught up to the NBA to the US. It is a weird idea though, and it's definitely a far cry from the old Eastern West.
It feels odd to me, I've got to say, and it's interesting, right? Because if you think about the state of origin in the NRL in eastern states in Australia, if you're listening or watching in the US, look up state of origin. It is the pinnacle of our game here, and it's something that all the players, they all want to be part of it. It's a 3-game series over 6 weeks. And it is those 3 games are the 3 biggest TV shows on Australian TV every year. So it is like the biggest ticket in town. And it kind of surprises me a little bit that the All-Star Weekend in the NBA isn't more popular. It's a long season. There's so many games, and I guess there's a lot to kind of get excited about with your regular team and the playoffs. And maybe this might generate a little bit more interest than what this has in the past, because it's obviously on the decline. The NBA is super popular, like I get it, but as a product, they're going to want this to be a commercial success as well. So they'll be hoping that this maybe like State of Origin here, they could pull it out of the fire and get something that's a little bit more of interest to the public. Can you give me one, data-based, tip that you can leave us with? What should we be watching out for, the end of the NBA season? Is there like a record that you think could get knocked over? Give me something you think might be of interest that might pop up before the end of the season.
LeBron has all the records. I thought the Thunder might have gone for the Warriors' 72-9 record. They have regressed a little bit over the last 2 months. But my thing is still about OKC. They're probably the team that's the closest in a while to being potentially the next dynasty, with just how well set up they are as a team, how deep they are, having the superstar player. Ever since, we haven't had a dynasty since the Warriors. We've actually, I believe, had 7 years in a row in the NBA of a different team winning the championship. And I think that's almost had ratings go down just because there isn't really a big storyline like there was in the 2010s with Steph versus LeBron and then KD joining and the Cavs and Warriors constantly going at it. If the Thunder win this one, watch out for that dynasty being created and maybe even ratings going up just because everybody wants to see who could finally knock them down. Because if they go back to back, that's essentially the beginning of a dynasty.
Yeah, no, you're right. And there was a lot of negative chat about the ratings being low and these two sort of small teams last year fighting it out. But I think you're right. If they can build something there, it builds interest as well, and people are going to want to get into that and see who can knock them off their perch. Zephyr, thank you. Well, Moneyball Kid, thank you for joining Moneyball, mate. Great to talk to you, and enjoy the rest of the NBA season.
Thank you. It was great talking.
Moneyball.
So what do you reckon? Is Cooper Flagg the best teenager in NBA history? Well, the numbers say this much. No teenager has ever reached this many milestones this early across so many parts of the game. So from Cooper Flagg to Josh Giddey, our Aussie superstar, to trades and the All-Star game, the NBA keeps reminding us that the real story isn't just talent, it's how you measure it. I'm Scott Keenan. This is Moneyball. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube, listen wherever you get your podcasts, and you can follow us on Instagram too, @Moneyball_show. Until next time, follow the money.